I'm going to give you a step-by-step formula on how you can retire early from property. By the end of the video, you'll know exactly how much money, how many properties, and what strategy you'll need so you can retire early and do whatever you want with your life. So when you talk about retiring from property, if you ask most people, their usual answer is, oh, I'll pay off the house. And a second common answer is that I can borrow against my home equity if I need the money. And if you're one of those people, then you need to be paying close attention to this, because I'm going to show you a better way that will not only let you retire and fund your lifestyle, but along the way, you'll end up building yourself a small fortune in the process. So the first thing you need to do is work out your retirement figure, which means figure out your monthly expenses, because to retire you need to know what you're aiming and working towards. And this figure is going to be completely personal. It'll be different for each and every one of you. And how I personally do it is to write a list of all your monthly outgoings to get a clear idea of how much you're spending on your essentials like your rent, your food and utilities, as well as discretionary items like your Netflix, your Amazon Prime, your haircuts and other stuff you can think of. Just be mindful that when I talk about outgoings, they must be within reason and the stuff that you actually spend your money on regularly. So don't add a cost to hire a Lamborghini, because it needs to be realistic and it also needs to be achievable. When you usually ask people how much money they need to retire, most people just say 10k, right? But I'm like, why do you need 10k if all your outgoings are only like 2.5k? This exercise, it'll give you a better idea of how much money you need to cover your regular expenses, because then you know how much you need to retire. To go one step further, I'd increase that number you've just got by an extra 25% just to adjust for inflation, and so that you've got some breathing space. So yeah, add 25% off. Don't do anything now until you figured out your retirement figure. So you do that now, work it out, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, I'm back. So by now you should have your retirement figure in mind. For this video, I'm going to use a nice round figure of £5,000 just to use as an example, right? For you, it could be less or it could be more, and that's fine. Then we need to work out how many properties you need to get to the £5,000. And the thing is that this really depends on which strategy you're going for. The three main strategies I'm going to cover are what I'd consider the most popular strategies. So that's your standard buy-to-lets, your HMOs, which is short for houses of multiple occupancies, or you can call them house shares. And then the third and final one is service accommodation, also known as short-term lets, where you list the properties on Airbnb and Booking.com. Which strategy you should go for and which one is best, it's all subjective based on your own goals and budget. But by showing a breakdown, hopefully you'll understand what it really takes to retire early.
We'll get back to the video in a few seconds, but 70% of you watching this video aren't subscribed to my channel. Please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button and buy more properties in the next few months. I'll be sharing everything so you can learn from my mistakes for free. Anyways, back to the video.
So starting off with buy-to-lets, the area I invest in is the northeast, where you can typically cash flow around £200 to £250 a month. Again, this could be more or less in your area. And just to clarify, right, cash flow is basically the rent you charge minus the cost to run the property. So for buy-to-lets, that's typically your mortgage and insurance. To be on the safe side, I'm going to use £225 a month, so we meet halfway. So based on just buy-to-lets, you would need 5,000 divided by 225, which works out to 22.22 properties. Because we can't exactly divide a property into 0.22, we're going to have to round it to the next whole number, which is 23 properties, which means you need 23 buy-to-let properties to retire with £5,000 a month. Now, if you're wondering, 22 properties, that's a lot, and of course it is. If retiring was that early, everyone would be doing it, right? Now, guys, the reality is that you'll see loads of people, right, that make out like property is this get-rich-quick scheme. I promise you it's not. It really isn't. The truth is that property is what I'd class as passive income, right? Or passive as possible, because nothing is really truly passive. So yeah, passive income, it does take a lot longer to build up than the active income, which is the money you make where you exchange your time for it. So your 9 to 5 or a business where you physically need to be present to make that money. I'll be honest, I have both active income through my businesses and I've got passive income through my investments, right? And one thing for certain, I can tell you one thing, that even though passive income takes a lot longer to make, to build that up, but once you do get it, it's way more satisfying than active income because you don't have to work for that income and it continues to pay you every single time, right? With my businesses, even though I do make good money now, you know, you still have to wake up, you still have to think about it non-stop. You know, there's always problems happening. You still have to work longer hours, right? Whereas with passive income, once I bought the property, once it's refinanced and rented out, I don't really hear about anything. I just get paid by my properties every single month with relative ease, right? Whereas a business or a 9 to 5 takes up a lot of your time. So just understand the key difference. And that's why I'm investing in property, because it's the most predictable and reliable way of earning that passive income, right? Anyways, if you don't love buy-to-lets like me, then you may want to consider service accommodations to get to your retirement figure quicker. Typically, my service accommodations, they profit anything between £400 to £800 a month in cash flow. But just to be conservative, you're going to use £450 a month. So if you divide 5,000 by 450, that works out to 12 service accommodations to reach that 5,000 figure. And I bet some of you already probably thinking 12 properties isn't too bad. I'll go with service accommodations. It gets even better with HMOs though, because usually you can cash flow around £600 to £1,000 a month after all your costs, so your gas, your electricity, your cleaning and council tax, right? Again guys, in your area it could be more, especially if you have more bedrooms in your HMOs. 5,000 divided by 600 is 8.33, so basically you need 9 HMOs for that £5,000 a month. And just to recap, you need 23 buy-to-lets to retire early at £5,000 a month, or 12 service accommodations, or 9 HMOs. Now, looking at each strategy and how many properties you need, your first reaction will be, I'm choosing HMOs all day, right? Because it takes fewer properties to reach that 5,000 a month, and why wouldn't you, right? But apart from how many properties each strategy needs to get to that £5,000 figure, right? You also need to take into account how much money you need for each strategy. And spoiler alert, they're not the same. Starting with buy-to-lets, I'd say in the Northeast, right? A 70k property, as long as it's in decent condition, you'd be able to get that 225 a month in cash flow. We already know that we need 23 properties for buy-to-let. So if you times 70k by 23, that's whopping 1.6 million. But let's be honest, none of us are going to buy all those properties, those 23 properties in cash. Typically, you'd use a 25% deposit to purchase a buy-to-let. So 25% of 70,000 is £17,500. Times that by 23, because you know that's how many buy-to-lets you need. So that now works out to £2,500. Slightly better, but you know, it's still way out of reach for most people. But the reality is that 400k, right, is if you decided to buy all of those 23 properties at once, which is never going to happen, right? It's very, very unlikely. And that's something I'd recommend even if you had the money. Instead, what you could do is use the BRRR method, which is short for buy, refurb, rent and refinance, my favorite strategy, where you buy a rundown property that's undervalued, you refurb the property to bring it back to a standard, and then refinance it at the higher valuation, you know, because you forced appreciation by adding value to it. After you've refinanced the property, if you've done everything right, you'll be able to pull majority of your initial cash out, and then with the money you get back from refinancing, you'd be able to reinvest into another property. Typically, most of my buy-to-lets after BRR leaving around 10 to 15,000 pounds of my own money per property. So if you times that by 15,000 pounds, for example, with the 23 properties required, that's now a total of 345,000 pounds. And honestly speaking, I think calculating how many properties you need using the BRR method is the most accurate. One, because unless you've got £1 million in the bank, this is the best way of making your money go further, yeah, to get higher returns. And it's not exactly realistic to be buying 23 properties all at once anyways. And with BRR, you get a much higher return because you're adding value to you. That's where you're making the most money. Whereas if you just bought it using a 25% deposit, not doing anything to the property, you're not going to make a higher return. With BRRR, you can get 1 or 2 properties at once, right? Refurb them, refinance them, and then once you've pulled most of your money out from those 1 or 2 deals, you get some money back, right? You get a pile of cash, which you can then use to rinse and repeat until you get to those 23 properties. It may take you 7 years, 8 years, or even more, but remember, property is a long-term game, right? And either way, it'll still be way earlier than your retirement age of 66 years old if you were in a 9 to 5. And that's the key thing here, that people think 7 to 8 years is a long time. Yeah, it might be, but what's your other option? Your other option is to retire at 66 years old, which is way longer. So yeah, please bear that in mind as well. For service accommodation, I'd say you can expect to pay £30,000 more compared to buy-to-let in the northeast, because you know, for service accommodation to ideally work, you need them closer to the city centre. It's not a must, but it helps, right? And those kind of properties in the city centre are more expensive, and obviously you need to do the refurb at a higher standard, because you know, in order for it to be like a short-term holiday, short-term let, and of course you need a bit more money because you need to furniture the property, whereas in buy-to-let, you know, there's no furniture usually. As an estimate, I'd say if you were buying everything with cash, right, which obviously you ain't going to, you could get a service accommodation in my investment area for 110k. Then the 12 properties needed to get to the £5,000 would mean that's a total of £1.32 million. But using a 25% deposit, that would cost you £300,000. Slightly better, but with buy, refurb, rent and refinance, I'd say conservatively you'd leave in around £25,000 per property, and if you needed 12 of those properties, all in all you'd end up spending £30,000 to get to your retirement figure of £5,000. And with HMOs at an average price of, I'd say, £130,000, because you know it costs you more to get en suites and bedrooms in the property, you'd need nine of those properties at a total of 1.17 million. But with the 25% deposit, it would be £292,000, and on average you'd leave in about 40k. 40k times 9 is £360,000, so you'd need £360,000 to get to those 9 HMOs, which would generate you that £5,000 as passive income. So hopefully this now gives you a much clearer idea of how much money you need to retire early, right? Using the different kind of strategies and the capital required. Now, I understand that all of those numbers are massive, right? I mean, the least capital required you need to retire early is like £300,000. But let's not forget, guys, that these calculations are based purely on cash flow. And the beauty of property, and why I think it's the best investment, is because apart from the cash flow, a lot of your wealth, actually most of your wealth, will be built from the capital growth. I know people say, and you probably hear this as well, that properties tend to double every 10 years. And you know what? I'm not sure how accurate that really is, and I can't seem to find real data that actually backs this up. What I do know for certain is that the average UK house prices increased by 3.5% in the 12 months to April 2023, with the Northeast, where I invest, rising by 5.5% in April compared to the 12 months earlier. So if you just take a property that's worth £100,000 today and look at the future projections based on that 3.6%, right? It's not made of figures. You can see that in 15 years time, your property will now be worth 164k. So not only are you able to retire from the cash flow the property produces, you're also earning yourself a small fortune through capital appreciation. That 64k uplift in value is from just one property, right? If you've got like 5 to 6 properties, then you'd make over 300k in 15 years just because you decided to invest in property and hold it for the long term. That's how powerful property is, right? And I sometimes think that people truly do not understand. They just look at the cash flow for a month or like a year and think, oh, that's not that much money. But what you'll realize is that it's not just cash flow that you're making money. You need to think long term, because when you start thinking long term, then you're making from cash flow and appreciation. No one got super rich or no one got wealthy built just by cash flow. How most people get wealthy, how most people retire early, is through the capital appreciation on top of the cash flow that you get. And don't forget that rents go up over time as well, and the mortgage or debt on your property, it reduces in real spending power as time goes on because of inflation. So basically, guys, the whole point of this is that if you want to retire early, comfortably, safely and fairly predictably, I don't think there's many better asset classes than property to help you do that. Obviously it's not easy, but if you put the work in, stay consistent, think long term, I promise you it'll be worth it. I read this quote once which said something along the lines of that: live a few years of your life that most people won't, so you can live the rest of your life the way most people can't. You've got the blueprint, you know exactly what needs to be done, so it's over to you now. I'm gonna leave a video of how I bought 4 properties for £66,000, which will give you more information on the BRRR strategy. Go watch that next, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you soon.